Older generations of Reddit, who are the I don't use computers people of your time. My grandmother didn't like to use the remote control for her television because she was afraid it would break somehow and function as a laser dangerous enough to set things on fire. My grandmother complained about remote controls for TVs because it would promote people being lazy. Because apparently watching TV in the first place is a rigorous activity. Modern day, I've had people tell me using a voice activated light system in my house is lazy because there's something to be said for getting up to turn on a light. Like what? It builds character to flip a switch? I'll take my space house thanks. My grandmother drinks only hot decaf coffee. 95 degrees with 100% humidity. Hot decaf coffee. Feeling parched after a day of hard work? Hot decaf coffee. And what to drink with your hamburger and french fries? Hot decaf coffee. Every meal, every day. When I was growing up, we never had ice. That was a luxury. Cold drinks aren't good for your stomach. Grandmas from the States. Grew up during the Depression. My parents are from a former Soviet country and also refuse to drink anything cold, saying it'll make you sick. My dad doesn't even drinks beer cold, room temperature at most. My 89 years old mom pays for cable but insists on watching only PBS and occasionally NBC, CBS or ABC. The other channels are too much technology to find on the remote. She also buys multiple boxes or cans of food, dates them in Sharpie marker, records the price, less coupon or sales special, and has a rack of all her finds. She will never eat all the oatmeal or beans in our collective lifetimes. But she was a Depression era child, so I get why the urge to stock up on food is strong. My dad once told me a story about his grandmother refusing to fly in planes because she didn't want to get her hair all messed up from the wind. I'm picturing her flying with Red Baron Snoopy as the pilot. Honey, I promise your hair won't get messed up from the wind. Plops leather bomber hat on her head. My grandmother is 89. When she was a kid, she had an uncle who hated cars. He called them machines and refused to drive one. It could have been job security though, her whole family worked for the railroad. In all fairness, cars are machines. Then again, so are trains. Fun fact. The Russian word for car is machina. My grandaunt still believes that 15 is the age of adulthood, that schooling isn't necessary beyond that point. She grew up in a time when literacy wasn't a given. With a bachelor's degree and my very mediocre Spanish, I would have killed it in 1920. For all of about 8 years. Well, now I'm greatly depressed. Color TV. When they became common in the mid-60s, a lot of older people believed they emitted harmful rays. When mom finally got one circa 1972, it was kept in her bedroom and we were ushered in to watch it only on special occasions. And we had to sit at least 10 feet away. When I was little, my mother would have us evacuate the kitchen whenever she used the microwave. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural NC in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story how when riding on a bus back from work one day, and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blakeburners got one of them fancy TVs. Saying how it was an evil thing, and would be simply bad of them to buy one, and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough never to get one. Of course, they knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on these neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which then was an hour drive from anywhere else. Digital clocks are lazy. My school has to hold an assembly for the 5th graders every year who can't read analog clocks because they can't afford to replace all the clocks in the middle high school building. My senior year of high school, I had a series of newspaper articles in the local paper explaining how the web wasn't a fad and wasn't going away. Nobody but one guy at the paper believed it. It was 1995. My high school, I graduated in 2000, was like this. We didn't have computers in school, and although there was pressure to buy them, the administration claimed computers were a dying fad and spent the money that was to go for a computer lab on new football equipment instead. My grandparents laughed at the idea of a mobile phone or sending messages through the phone line when fax machines were a thing. My grandparents didn't like computers. They still had a typewriter or wrote by hand. I was given a typewriter as a kid, but by then I was using Windows 95. OG hipster right here. My grandmother is 97 and told me about people who would refuse to get air conditioning or drink sodas because they the devil's work. She grew up on a farm in a 2-room house with 11 family members living in that house. She always had sodas and the AC rocking and rolling all summer. My grandparents refused to get an answering machine. My mother, who has a smartphone and uses email, still refuses to communicate via text messages. It's gone the opposite way now. I can't stand it when my mother leaves a voice message instead of just texting me. My answering machine takes forever to get to the message, and it's only ever her telling me to call her back. My grandpa used to tell me that he was basically set for life because he learned to read and write. Mass illiteracy wasn't as long ago as we like to think. My grandfather refused to get a VCR. But not because he was a Luddite. VCRs were all made in Japan and he had fought in the Pacific in World War II, so he refused to buy anything Japanese. Interesting side fact. This is why Nissan originally started selling cars as Datsun. They figured there was gonna be a lot of bitter vets who remember Nissan making war materials. No car of mine will have electric windows. You're asking for trouble. Uncle Fred. I said at one time I would never buy CDs. I liked albums and tapes too much. I never got rid of the albums and tapes, but I have many CDs also. When they first became available, I honestly felt that both CDs and DVDs were just an industry conspiracy to stop people from recording their own music movies with cassettes VHS. I don't read novels. My grandfather thought they were a plot by the elites to both ruin our eyesight and keep us locked away in a fantasy world. How old are you that a technological advancement your grandfather didn't trust was books? Socrates has joined the chat. Grandfather thought graduating high school was a big deal. He graduated in 1941 and was the first in this family. We had a great aunt who hated using the washing machine and claimed it never cleaned the sheets properly. Rural areas are always fun for this. In a grocery store, I overheard an older couple, back in 1989, discussing their high cholesterol levels. They didn't trust doctors and said downing a cup of really hot coffee every morning would clear the obstructions. No need for fancy medicine. Touch tone darling. My mom refused to pay the $1 and change a month to have it. She finally caved in around 2002. Edit. Since several have asked, touch tone was a keypad, much like what almost every phone is now. Before that it was a rotary dial phone. Many years ago we had an old Paul Bunyan type CNC operator that refused to learn an upgraded PC based input device because he could do a program faster on the machine. He was flat out wrong and we had to prove it to his ignorant, stuck in his ways ass. He finally, and laughingly with everyone, years later admitted that that was pretty damn hard-headed. My grandfather was Mennonite, but had moved to a city and worked in factories as an adult. He even used to watch TV until John Wayne died, then he got rid of their set. He said it was evil to watch dead people moving around on the screen as if alive, like watching ghosts. He would constantly tell us that TV was the devil's work. As a kid, I started drawing cartoon characters, like animal characters and stuff. One day he asked to see my drawings, and he was outraged, saying I was drawing the product of bestiality. Said it was evil. All that said, I loved him, and as I got older he and I got really close. He was a God-fearing man, but he was also a very humble, peaceful, and funny guy. He taught me woodworking, gardening, and the joy of just sitting quietly in nature. He was just trying to save you from becoming a furry. I'll never own one of those horseless carriages. When I come out of the saloon, at least the horse knows the way home. I leased my horse to a guy who actually did ride him to the bar and back. He got pulled over 5 separate times just because the cops were confused. My grandmother, who'd lived through the Depression, refused to use an ATM. She always went into the teller to withdraw money. She was worried that if the machine took her card, she'd lose access to her account. Just getting her to keep her money in the bank was a challenge, and the ATM was a step too far.